There's a story my parents always told me about my infant self. My dad always had a subscription to National Geographic growing up, and this one day I was particularly excited to get home and get the mail because, according to my parents, I knew that this month's copy of National Geographic was there, and there was a featured article in it about India. Growing up, I was obsessed with India. I was apparently always going on about how I had grown up there in a past life, and to my parents' shock, National Geographic was actually there, and there was an article about India in it. And to my 4-year-old delight, there was a giant pull-out poster of India that hung on my wall for years. Now, I have absolutely no memory of this day, and I cannot verify if any of that happened or if it was all just my overtired parents' imagination. And I definitely never told them. I do kind of remember building my old house out of Duplos and very much not knowing the difference between people from India and Native Americans and confusing them because, I was 4. Despite my cultural confusion, I do have to credit my early exposure to National Geographic to opening my eyes beyond just small-town Oregon and fostering a more creative and imaginative approach to life. Every single weekend, I was out exploring the woods and the creeks that snaked through our small town. Every thicket and stream had a story or a secret just waiting for me to find it. Some of the first words I learned to read were National Geographic. I learned my Animals of the World from Nat Geo, and I know that I wasn't the only person to open the covers of that magazine with wonder in their eyes. But we are, of course, in the era of digital images, online articles, and live streams of anywhere you would want to see on this planet. Do we really need a magazine to keep opening our eyes to the world? I mean, let's be honest here. When's the last time you read National Geographic? No joke, it's probably been about a decade since I've seen it anywhere but the newsstand's shelves, let alone taking the time to read any of it. Taking all that into consideration, Disney, in their mission to acquire every atom in the known universe, acquired majority stock of National Geographic in 2019 and began the transition from the classic yellow bordered journal into just another online blog spot. Print media, just another thing that we millennials killed, or did we? Spoiler alert, we didn't. For over a century, National Geographic has given people a view of the world's variety of animals, plants, and human cultures, and has been the source of the first images of boobs horny American 12-year-olds see, which we will get to. The National Geographic Society was founded in 1888 by one of the founders of AT&T, Gardner Green Hubbard, and 9 years later was passed on to the other founder of AT&T, Alexander Graham Bell. Yeah, the fucking phone dude! Alex then named his son-in-law, Gilbert Hovey Grosvenor, as the editor of National Geographic, where he remained for 55 years. I can't imagine working in 55 years, let alone at the same place for 55 years. That shit only happens to wealthy Nepo babies. Under the leadership of Gilbert, National Geographic started using printed images to help better connect their readers to the stories of cultural intrigue. Pictures had been used in the past to great emotional effect, like in the gruesome documentation of the Civil War Dead by Roger Fenton and Carol Jathmari, as well as the 1890 book How the Other Half Lived by Jacob Riis, which highlighted the squalor that much more than half the population lived in to the privileged upper crust bourgeoisie. But instead of highlighting misery porn, National Geographic wanted to highlight the breadth and wonder of human civilization and culture to the world to varying degrees. From the jump, National Geographic was a non-profit organization with the stated goal of educating and inspiring conservation and exploration, whose eventual expeditions were paid for by membership dues. As the decades ticked on, the magazine continued to expand, and eventually, in 2007, National Geographic Ventures split up its expanding media production portfolio, which included movies, TV shows, and even a radio station, and sold it all to Fox in 2015. This acquisition came with heavy scrutiny as the long-time revered publication was now in the hands of Rupert fucking Murdoch. Employees and staff writers were worried that Rupert's slimy track record might sully the good name of National Geographic. And they were right to be worried. Remember Doomsday Preppers? Because National Geographic was acquired in 2015 when the aesthetic and ethos of the time was lowest common denominator humor, Rupert took his long-established track record of trash reality TV shows and slapped the yellow border on it. A journal who had shown me my first images of a gazelle, shown my sister pictures of Wat Prakau, shown this entire country images of the countries and people that we had sent soldiers to occupy and brutalize, was now platforming fucking gun nuts who are obsessed with some overpowered disruptive force that only they can overpower through sheer patriotic will. Umberto Eco would have a fucking field day with this show. This shift in focus brought even less attention to the already struggling media company, and eventually Fox sold the scraps of National Geographic to the House of Mouse, where they pounded in the final nails into print media's coffin. Under the direction of Disney and Bob Iger, National Geographic fired the last remaining staff writers on June 28, 2023. I want to take a moment and acknowledge the WGA SAG-AFTRA strike. I am not affiliated with any union, and no union labor was used to write or produce this video, and I wholeheartedly support the WGA SAG-AFTRA strike. Solidarity. Fuck Bob Iger, and fuck anyone who thinks that they can starve out the backbone of a multi-billion-dollar industry that the CEOs drain so much from. But why did National Geographic decide to lay off its staff writers? Despite a drop in subscriptions, National Geographic was still raking in $500 million last year. $500 million in 2022. Like, when you think of Disney, you think Marvel. But the superhero franchise only made $115 million last year. The marketplace makes the most rational decision. Blech. So, instead of educating and showcasing the world in hopefully the least impactful way, now we gotta sit through Kevin Feige's Phase 26, where Loki has a sixth-dimensional orgy to reforge the Bifrost until Hulk smashes through the Loki orgy and every Avenger from every universe has to fight each other. It's all in the comics, I fucking swear to it. Look it up. One of the main reasons Disney is feeling the need to tighten their belts is some very complicated matters involving the Indian Premier League and Disney's rights to stream them that I will not be getting into in this video because that is a whole ass video in and of itself, but has led to such a drastic drop in subscriptions that Disney is thinking about selling their Indian branch, and in the meantime is using National Geographic as a sacrificial limb. This, along with a drop in readership, is widely credited as why National Geographic will be stopping physical production and shifting towards a more modern media focus. As skeptical as I am about contract gig writers, which it really feels like National Geographic is moving towards that, a wider proliferation of more local, global, independent journalists making videos, TikToks, and VR experiences and getting paid a good wage by National Geographic is an interesting concept. It's important to mention that the National Geographic Society is still active and independent from the media empire, and I definitely want to talk about them at some point. But it's conceivable that they could buy the magazine rights back someday. Maybe I'm just old, but there's just something about holding the physical thing in your hand that just hits different. Like, the experience of opening up a full savanna or canyonland can never be experienced on a blog or a website. You will never get that full spread experience. And it sounds like I'm talking about porn. it's not just the sensation of holding a magazine in your hand, it's everything that comes with it. It's being able to go back and experience those pictures and memories again and again. Those magazines were purchased long before I was alive, but were held onto for me to revisit again and again as I grew up. And as I mentioned before, I had that poster of India on my door, as well as dozens of other National Geographic posters lining my walls. I'm sure those magazines are long gone by now, but if stored right, theoretically, I could give those same magazines to my potential nieces and nephews and give those children the same exact experience that I had as a kid. Maybe this was just my school, but the best days of middle school were when National Geographic was pulled out of the back and used to make collages for some art project that went up on the wall. God, school feels patronizing as fuck in retrospect. But there were always a couple specific magazines that were held onto a little or a lot longer by the boys, and then shoved into their lockers. And every one of you cis-het dudes best be fucking squirmy in your seats, because you know what you fucking did. These magazines were, of course, just showing women living their lives, wearing their clothing or lack thereof, and whether intentional at time of shooting or not, objectified these women's bodies for millions of Americans who focused on their nakedness rather than their culture. There is absolutely a discussion to be had around the sexualization of nakedness and the taboo around being naked in America, as well as a conversation to be had about the framing of subjects in photography from both the editing room and from behind the lens, to make sure that your work is not objectifying or exploiting. As someone whose chest hasn't seen the sun in 3 or 4 years, I'm probably not the best person to talk about the stigma around being naked. But exploitation from behind the camera, that's something I'm a little familiar with. Inherently, going into a place with the intent to photograph creates a weird performative barrier between you and your subjects. If the intent is to document the average daily life, do you really think you're going to get a full and true coverage if you're bringing in a camera crew and a whole lighting array? And here we reach something of a crossroads where there is demonstrable good in showing the variety of human cultures and highlighting the shared human reality that we all live in, at the cost of abstracting the intent and focusing on the naked bodies that feels almost exploitative and exhibitionist on the photographer's end. I'm not saying that any journalist shooting naked bodies should shoot in a way that censors, or that photographers should censor nudity at all. Doing so creates a further taboo and weirdness around nudity that was never intended to be sexual at all. What I am saying, though, is there is a responsibility by the photographer to examine what their photos will be used for and how they will be viewed in broad publication. You need to treat your camera's lens like a gun's barrel, never point it at anything you do not intend to shoot, because once things are published, you cannot take them back. On the other hand, it is impossible to understate the humanizing effect National Geographic has had on this world. For centuries, racists and people with vested interests have kept us divided with lies and propaganda about how uncivilized every other culture is and how it's the white man's burden to bring civilization to the world. But it's so much harder to spread that hate when there's a publication highlighting the beautiful breadth of the variety of the ways humans have chose to live together. If you've just read an article on a completely different way of life that is just as complex and interesting as yours, how can you justify that your culture is superior? Photojournalism easily exposes the truth that colonialism did significantly more harm than good at preserving human cultures from around the world. To learn about a culture in antiquity, someone would charter an expedition to a place, usually with permission from the local monarch, to establish a colony where they would then take a chunk of land by force, remove the indigenous people through war, enslavement, or disease, and then take their cultural goods back to their homeland to be examined by archaeologists and anthropologists. You could say it had a slight impact on indigenous cultures. Photojournalism, if done right, has the potential to have the least amount of impact on any culture they're looking to portray. These days, journalists can go to a place, get a local team, and get the first-hand story from people there. Or better yet, with the gradual global proliferation of HD cameras and smartphones, local people can tell their own stories in their own words, and that is something that is truly exciting to me. I don't know about you, but I want my news from the Yemeni front from someone who's lived there and understands the nuances beyond just the story rather than a correspondent from Fox or CNN. The medium is the message, and when the news becomes a tool of the masses, revolutionary possibilities open up. This more atomized approach for news collection aggregation could potentially lead to a more connected world, but opens the door to the easiest potential to exploit young and underpaid writers and photographers for free or severely undervalued work. Shit, I'm not making a cent off of any of this. I'm doing this all for the love of the game. But if everyone's working for free, why would the networks pay for the content? The next generation of journalists should have good wages and a stable working environment, just like the journalists that inspired all of us. But when Disney owns everything, a drop in one of their markets affects everything their gloved hands touches, endangering the future of education publications. I don't know about you, but I don't want to live in a world without journalism and stories from around the world from trusted publications like National Geographic. But if that means that the writers of those stories have to be underpaid gig workers, fuck all that. National Geographic and photojournalism deserve so much more respect than making it a gig. I would love to see these contracts pay a life-changing amount of money to these people, because if anyone can afford to do that, Bob fucking Iger can. No, but seriously, National Geographic was a foundational piece of my childhood, and while it's not gone, and I know it may return in some capacity one day, knowing that Gen Alpha and beyond won't have yellow bordered books of wonder kind of breaks my heart. And I know that there are other magazines highlighting people and cultures and places around the world in non-exploitative means, but I don't know, dude. There's only one National Geographic. Maybe it's capitalist brainworms and brand loyalty. Maybe it's some kind of intergenerational sunk cost fallacy. Or maybe I'm just a sentimental, nostalgic ass 30-year-old and it feels like a significant piece of my childhood is heaving a death sigh. But I am actually mourning the loss of National Geographic. I'm sure it's stressful to be Bob Iger and run a multi-billion-dollar company. I could never do that, and I would never do that. And if I ever did, I would expect each and every one of you to get proletariat on my ass. But fuck Bob Iger and fuck his poor management decisions, costing us one of the longest lasting journals in American history. Disney, in a desperate capitalist war with Amazon, has spread itself too thin, and now holes on one side of the planet are affecting everyone, and that is on top of already fucking over the writers for years and allegedly canceling shows after 3 seasons to avoid paying their extras a minimum wage. Zero fucking sympathy for that millionaire bourgeoisie. Ugh. National Geographic, you will be missed. Maybe not by the women whose bodies you've exploited, but by curious minds and young learners who want to experience the world they live on. To know that there is potentially another small child on the other side of the planet reading the same magazine with an article in it written by someone in their town. And both children can experience a level of wonder as they flip through these pages. But Bob Iger and the rest of the Disney corporate board don't want that to happen. And I am fully over y'all.